with international students, refugees, and a lot more that are welcome into the program. And so to help us know a little bit more about this, we are going to have Dr. Kavuro, who has a doctoral degree from Stellenbosch University. He is driven for and by social justice, socio-economic development of the community, and has a keen interest in public international law, human rights law, constitutional law, immigration law, refugee law, criminal as well as transitional justice. He writes widely on refugee, migrants, and related criminal matters, has a solid track record in advocacy and research on human refugee rights, international criminal justice, and domestic public policies. His research projects usually explode the question whether and to what extent refugees and asylum seekers should enjoy socio-economic rights in view of the constitutional values of human dignity, equality, and freedom, and in the concept of favorable treatment as used in the 1951 Refugee Convention. Basically, he knows what he's talking about, and he's going to come and we're going to have an engaging session. So again, with all the other sessions, there's going to be options and opportunities for Q&A at the end, and I know that this one's going to have a lot of Q&A, so write it down and make sure that your hand goes up first. But please join me as we welcome on stage Dr. Kavuro. A round of applause, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. They have introduced me already. And the topic I'm going to speak about is refugee rights awareness, the inclusion of the people in refugee situations in higher education. So this is a very important topic because as I will go through my presentation, I will try to speak about the rights, but I wanted to start by stating that I have structured this presentation in terms of South African context, not in terms of the African context, because each and every country of Africa has its own laws and its own legislation. So when we apply these legislation, they apply differently. So in this topic, we're going to see, I'm going to start by stating the scope of this presentation. Then we look at the categories of non-citizen. We look at the importance of education. I will define who is the refugee and who is an asylum seeker. I talk about the constitutional socio-economic rights. We look at the subsidized rights under that topic. We look at the financial aid and assistance under that topic. And we look at the legal barriers of inclusivity in terms of financial aid and assistance. We will look at the arguments for the inclusion, and then we look at the harmonization of socio-economic rights and the Refugees Act through court decisions. Then we will go to the conclusion and we conclude. I'm not sure whether I will go through my presentation and then I take a question thereafter. Because I haven't been here in the morning, so I don't know how the other took you through the presentations, but mine, I think I'm going to take you through presentation first, and then you will be able to engage with the contents. So the focus of this presentation is on refugee rights awareness as it pertains to the rights to have access to higher learning institutions. So I started by looking at the Constitution, especially Section 29, subsection 1, paragraph B of the Constitution, which states that everyone has the right to further education, which the state, through reasonable measures, must make it progressively available and accessible. You see that I have underlined accessible and available. Section 29, subsection 2, further says, to ensure the effective access to and the implementation of the right, the state must consider all reasonable educational alternatives, including single medium institution, taking into account equity, the practicability, and the need to redress the results of past racial discrimination laws and practices. So those three aspects are very important, because the equity, practicability, and the need to redress the past discrimination is very important, and that is when we speak to access to education. So the question that we wanted to explore in this presentation is the term everyone. So there is a term everyone in terms of section 29, broad enough to include all non-citizens, or does it refer only to South Africans? Because perhaps when I started here, I say everyone. And when I said everyone, I was meaning every person who is in this room. So there's everyone meaning others who are outside of this room. So if non-citizen are not included, who is excluded, in what context? So who bears the primary responsibility to protect people in refugee situations? So that is what we wanted to look at in this presentation. So you see that we have different categories of non-citizens. The first one is in terms of Immigration Act of 2002. We have a term, the people we call illegal foreigners. So when we refer to illegal foreigners, the term illegal foreigners will include undocumented asylum seekers, it will include economic migrants. Normally, the term economic migrants is a political term that is used by politicians, but you will not find it in terms of law. Because in terms of law, we just have illegal foreigners. So if you are not legally, it means, in other words, it means that if you are not legally admitted in South Africa, you are illegal foreigner. If your visas has been expired and you're not yet renewed, you are illegal foreigners. If you have applied for a visa when yours is expired and is still pending, the application of renewal is still pending, then you fall in that category of illegal foreigners. So the illegal foreigners is very broad to encompass a lot of different categories. Then we have labor migrants. The labor migrants, we may speak to the people who come to South Africa because they are critically skilled, or those who are looking for general work. There's the holders of special permits, people with the special permits. We speak to people like people from Zimbabwe and the people from Lesotho. They have special permits. So we have others who come to South Africa to visit, who are visitors. The others come to South Africa for the reason of tourism, who are tourists. Then we have international students, the people who come to study in South Africa. And we have members of diplomatic missions, those who are representing their own country. And we have investors, those who come to make business in South Africa. So other we have falls under Refugees Act of 1998, and we have there two categories. The first one is refugees, another one is asylum seekers. So I'm not going to speak to other category, which we call the IDP. The IDP refers to internal internally displaced persons. So it's a person who was forced to displace internally, and he remains in the boundaries of his or her own country. So I'm looking for those who are compelled to leave the country and to go to seek asylum in another country. So when you become a refugee, do you need to study? Because that is a question. So we look at the importance of education in refugee life. So refugees themselves consider tertiary education to be the only hope for better future. Simply because the education and the training will increase the employability and entrepreneurship, which are means, of course, of earning a good life in the host society. It is a vehicle for defeating the economic hardships they are facing and the physical deprivation. So education helps them grow the skilled science and the technology capacity needed in the local labor market. So when a person comes here as a refugee, always, in most of the situations, they will need education. Because you know that many people come from different countries. They come from, for example, Mozambique. So when they come from Mozambique and they speak Portuguese, they need to adapt. They need to attend the language schools so they can be able to integrate themselves in a society. So when they come speaking French, also they need to attend the schools, which becomes difficult for them to be able to resume their education because of a language barrier that they are facing. So education is still essential for them to resume their studies. This is in a context where they leave their own countries while they were studying. So, for example, if you take this situation here where we are, and you find yourself in Zimbabwe at this moment, then when you are in Zimbabwe, you need to resume your studies. Because you want to say, because you find yourself in another country, you are going to abandon your aspirations. So that is the first one. The second is that they come to South Africa, attend primary schools, secondary school, they matriculate here, and they wanted to further their studies. So that is second. The third one is where if there are adults, they still need to take vocational training so that they can be able to be employed or self-employed. So in South Africa, education to refugees becomes very essential simply because when they come to South Africa, the asylum seekers does not have access to humanitarian relief and assistance, and they need to integrate themselves in a society. So when they need to do that, they need to have a means to be able to sustain themselves. So it is very important that they receive education and they receive those vocational trainings. So who is a refugee? Because sometimes we talk about refugees and the people understand this term to include the many categories of foreign nationals. So the definition is drawn from the 1951, the United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees. The second is the 1969 African Union Convention governing the specific aspects of refugee problems in Africa. So the UN Convention will define a refugee in the context of such person having a well-founded fear of persecution on account of either race, of a tribe, of nationality, religion, political opinion, membership of a particular social group. So when you sit for the interview, when you are seeking asylum, then they need to determine whether you have a well-founded fear in those contexts. So the second, which is the African Union Convention, then we refer to events seriously disrupting public order. So these events, they come in the form of civil war, of terrorism, ethnic conflict, foreign aggression, or armed rebellion. In the context of South Africa, the definition comes from those conventions, and then you will find it in terms of Section 3 of the Refugees Act. And it combines both of those conventions. And the person is recognized in terms of Section 24, subsection 3, Section 3, and the paragraph B. So those are the former recognized refugees, and who have a Section 24 permit or Section 24 visas. And this category of foreign nationals, in the context of refugees, they will have rights in terms of Section 27. And those rights is the rights in the Bill of Rights that apply to everyone, is subject to full legal protection. Whereas in terms of asylum seeker, they are entitled to the same rights, but these rights are not fully protected, and where it becomes vulnerable to asylum seekers because they are entitled to the rights in the Constitution, but not fully protected. So the question of partial protection becomes a problem because it is not defined in any law or by the court, and therefore it becomes problematic. For example, when we wanted to say that a person is entitled to the right to education partially. So the partiality is not, we won't be able to define that. So there's a socioeconomic rights. So when I say that they're entitled to the right in the Bill of Rights, those rights in the Bill of Rights, they include socioeconomic rights. So socioeconomic rights will include housing, will include the shelter, education, social security, social assistance, food, water, and health care. So it further includes civil rights. So when we talk about civil rights, we talk about equality, dignity, life, freedom of person. They further enjoy political rights, and the political rights, they don't enjoy the voting rights, but they enjoy the freedoms of protest, the expression, and association. Okay? So when we talk about the socioeconomic rights, I always refer to them as the rights for sale. So when I refer them to the rights for sale, it's because when you need to access water, you need to pay. When you need food, you need to pay. When you want to go to school, you need to pay. So when you need to go to hospital, you need to pay. So that is why I refer to them too as the rights for sale. In terms of state responsibility, as you see in terms of Section 29, is that the state must make it available to you and accessible. So accessibility will come in the context of physical, which is within your reach, and the financial, which is affordable. So when you need to visit a clinic, it must be affordable to you. So affordable price that we expect. But what even if it is affordable to many people, but you still cannot afford it? So if you cannot afford it, that is where the state comes in and provide support, which we refer to as state support. So when a right, in order to be able to access it, you need a state support. We refer to it as subsidized rights. So subsidized rights in terms of South African context, we will have the state support is designed to achieve equality, social justice through redressing the injustices of the past social inequalities, to advance previous disadvantaged communities. So in terms of education system, subsidized rights will be in the context of promoting equal representativity and equal access. So we will have a two-stream where we have a state support, but we always have also private support, because the private entities, companies also request to contribute to such a support in order to provide for all people. So there's previously disadvantaged communities include refugees. So the answer to this will be no, unless if they were in South Africa prior to 1994, and they have also experienced the past discrimination, disadvantaged by the past discrimination, or they experienced those injustices that we refer to before 1994. So the previous disadvantaged communities is defined in terms of Employment Equity Act. That is why you find the definition as a designated group. And the designated group are the black people, women, and the people with the disabilities. So when we speak to black people, we refer to Africans, Coloreds, and the Indians. So the questions that we have are African refugees or refugee women or refugee with disabilities included in that category of designated groups. So the question will be no. Why? Because they did not experience the past discrimination. So when we have all legislations that seeks to redress the past injustice, then you find out that in most cases, they exclude the refugees and the asylum seekers because they fall outside of the category of designated groups. So it does in this context that of subsidized rights, we have financial aid and the assistance at many universities in South Africa, and this financial aid and assistance, they exclude refugees and asylum seekers because of the reason that I have stated. So you will see that the financial aid and assistance are administered by universities and the colleges and the other institutions such as the NSF, NSFAS, and the RIF, RISA, SSDF. Private companies, the private companies follow the spirit of the state, so they don't always compromise the state spirit, and also the NGOs like the UNHCR. So when we talk about the private companies, we may perhaps refer to the MasterCard. When we talk about the NGOs, we may refer to the UNHCR. So you will see that mostly in many situations, refugees and asylum seekers in South Africa, they fall out of these socioeconomic programs designed to uplift the poor and to achieve equality. I think my time is running out. I think, do I still have a minute? So in terms of international law, so in terms of international law, we have what we call favorable treatment approach. This favorable treatment approach, you'll find it under the UN Convention. And in the Article 22, sub-Article 2, it states that the governments or state shall accord to refugees treatment as favorable as possible, and in any event not less favorable than that accorded to non-citizens generally in the same circumstances, with respect to education, other than elementary education, and in particular as regards access to studies, the recognition of foreign school certificates, diplomas and degrees, the remission of fees and the charges, and the award of a scholarship. So you see that they refer to equal treatment with the non-citizens. So the question is how non-citizens are treated in South Africa. Okay, so the non-citizens in South Africa, are admitted on conditions that they are self-reliant and self-supportive. So hence they are self-reliant and self-supportive, they are excluded from socioeconomic programs. Okay? So every non-citizen who is not able to support himself or herself is referred to in terms of Migration Act as an undesirable person. So when you become an undesirable person, it means that you are depending on the state funds. So when you start to depend on it, you become undesirable, to be arrested, detained, and deported. Okay? So this general treatment for non-citizens is the one which is accorded to refugees and the asylum seekers. And to do that is wrong, because the refugees and asylum seekers are admitted in South Africa in the context of humanitarian ground or humanitarian reasons. So when they are at the border, they don't need to prove that they are self-reliant or that they are self-supportive, and they don't need to show that they have got a passport or that they have a visa. Okay? So they are just allowed in the country because of issues happening in their country. If there's a civil war, or when his learning has a well-founded fear on any account which I stated earlier. So that is why they should be treated differently. So I have many of them, but I wanted to conclude by stating that treatment, because when refugees now arrive in the country and they are able to attend universities, they are admitted to universities, then you find that those refugees and asylum seekers are treated as international students. So when you treat them as international students, in other words, you are saying that they are self-reliant and self-supportive, when on the other side they are not. So actually they are not. So you are treating them in a manner that is going to deprive them access to universities, because they are not self-reliant. Okay? So it's a people who needs state support. So when universities treats them as international students, they are deprived of student financial aid and assistance, and education becomes inaccessible. I think I may end up here so that I can be able to take questions. And
1, 2. Thank you so much. Can we give a round of applause to Dr. Kavuro for that? Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us. I'm going to open up for questions just now, because I know as international students there's a lot that we can relate to in that presentation. I'm going to start from this side of the room and move this side. 1, 2. 1, 2 for now. And then I'm sure their questions will stir within something in you for you to ask a question as well. Please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. Sorry, I just want to ask a quick question. Well, I wouldn't say I understand most of the acts because I've never read through them. But what I want to ask is just based on international student thing. Well, I would believe that you've been working so much in South Africa here, and you understand when it comes to the visa thing. What is the ideal way when you, as an international student, just as you've written, I think in the last slide there, you said there will be equal right. But the right, is it just after you've been given your visa? Or maybe take, for example, you've been offered your visa and you want to renew. The right, is it just after your renewal, when you've been offered, or just at any time, maybe even before the renewal? So what I'm trying to say in this essence is, as an international student, take for example, I'm here in South Africa, and I'm supposed to renew my visa. What are the normal ethics? Take for example, when they say, these are the documents you need to bring, and you bring up the documents, what are the situations behind the reasons why sometimes you are being rejected even with valid documentations. And is that part of the rights we are talking about now? And is it, or when I say right this time around is, I expect that a normal South African can get anything. And based on an international student, we seems to be, maybe I wouldn't say generally, but I particularly, I think I'm suffering from that, and still till now. So I want to understand, because you said it, that currently, like, quite a lot of students that don't have their visa maybe renewed, they are illegal. So what do we do when it comes to when you have the right document, but then you're still suffering from the problem?
Thank you for that question. Would you like to address it now, or should I take more?
Another one.
More, okay. So, Matthew.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Matiso Sile, and I'm writing my dissertation on statelessness. We find that within refugees and asylum-seeking people, along with displaced people, they are stateless, right? And there are stateless people outside those contexts. But you find that your law of human rights, NGOs, or even academic journals, they are more treating stateless people as rejects or black sheep of the family. Does that has anything to do with the law itself, or maybe the difficulty of dealing with someone who's saying, I am Matiso Sila, I'm born in South Africa from maybe an immigrant parent or a South African mother, and now I'm statelessness, and I don't know how to present myself to say, this is who I am. Secondly, as an advocate, I would like an advice for someone who's passionate, because now we're dealing with a law, and there's people who are not socially, economically, and politically protected. But now, if you want to deal or focus on the aspect of human development, how would one go about it?
Repeat that question.
Okay.
The last one.
Okay, so when we're talking about stateless people, right, I might ramp a bit, but I believe that statelessness are found within the context of migration, immigration, refugees, asylum seeking, right? So now, if we're not focusing on the law, right, the trajectory of law, because we can go to Home Affairs, it can be a case, courts, and while those are still attended on, those people are not socially, economically, and politically protected. As someone who's passionate, what advice can you give me in terms of focusing on the human development of people who are not able to attend school, people who are not benefiting from the state in any other way, people who are being exploited?
Can we?
So the first question is related to international students. So international students, when they come to South Africa as international students, unless they are refugees or asylum seekers, because as I indicated is that a refugee or an asylum seeker, when he's at university, is defined or treated as an international student. So when a person comes into South Africa as an international student, first thing you do is to apply for a visa. And when you apply for a visa, the person providing a visa must see whether you are able to cover your fees and living cost before they approve your study visa. Okay? That is what they do. So when you come here in South Africa, the university is expecting you to be able to support yourself during the period of the study. So only if you are an asylum seeker or refugees, because when you are an asylum seeker and refugees, you look up to South African authority to protect you, because you came to them for protection. When you needed to attend school, whether it's a primary, whether it's a secondary, university, then you do it with the expectation that South African authorities will support you to be able to further your education or to undertake your education. But as I indicated in the categories of non-citizens, I referred to people with holders of exemption permits. Okay? So exemption permits comes in the context of Zimbabweans and Lesotho. So exemption permits, they exempt people from the self-sufficiency rule. Okay? So that you are able to have access to South Africa in the context of business and employment. And mostly the exemption permit does not include socioeconomic rights except the right to health care. So when they get sick, they can be able to access a clinic. But others, they will depend on their own. So it's good that we understand the categories of non-citizens and you understand your rights. Because when you understand your rights, you will be able to claim the rights in the context of which you are entitled to. Because in certain cases, we do say that there's a certain situation that a person feels that you have a right, but the right is non-existent. I wanted to speak to the issues of stateless persons and other categories that may be in terms of the Constitution. So when we talk about the Constitution allows access to everyone in South Africa to have access to socio-economic rights. But when we talk about the Constitution, we talk about the Constitution to say that it's a guiding document. So in order for the rights in the Constitution to have an effect, we'll have a legislation. So for example, if we talk about the right to housing, then we have a Housing Act. So if we wanted to know that who is entitled to the right to adequate housing, we look at the Housing Act in order to determine who is the recipient. For example, in terms of Housing Act, then you will find that it is restricted to citizens and for nationals with a permanent resident. Okay? So when we talk about the NSFAS, for example, the NSFAS Act will restrict access to financial aid assistance to citizens only. And that one is one that gives the subsidized rights in terms of furthering education. So through the decision of the court, I think the court handed down the decision in 2022 and in 2020, where the NSFAS was extended to for nationals with a permanent resident. So if you don't fall in a category for permanent resident, you are still a refugee, you are still an asylum seeker, so NSFAS is out of reach. Okay? So in that context, it is for civil societies who are advocating for the rights of vulnerable to do their best to ensure that refugees and asylum seekers are included. The same as it happened when the social assistance or social grants were limited to foreign nationals with a permanent residence, but later they came to extend it to include refugees, but to exclusion of asylum seekers. Because as I said, asylum seekers, they are entitled to the rights in the Bill of Rights, but they are not fully protected. And that leaves at a vulnerable position. So when we speak about the rights to socio-economic and political, which we say that we wanted to be extended to each and everyone who may not have been in a school, because when we talk about the school, we talk about the right to education, which is part of socio-economic rights. And when we talk about the social assistance, it is another right. When we talk about the right to food, it is another one. When we talk about the right to shelter, is another one. So each and every right has its own legislation that regulates it, that gives effect to it. That is why when I started to this presentation, I indicated that when the refugees comes to South Africa, when they are still illegal foreigners before they are documented, they need to integrate themselves in a community. So they do it on their own. But when it comes to children, like children of refugees, especially children of refugees, then the children of refugees, they will be able to have access to social grants. But not other foreign nationals. Refugees or permanent residents will be able to have access. The rights that each and everyone can be able to have access to is emergency medical care or primary health care. But when it comes to other rights, it becomes problematic to them.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you very much, Dr. Kavuro. I hope your question was answered and addressed. Thank you so much for asking questions, guys. Unfortunately, we've run out of time to get more questions for this session. But before we ask you to take your seats, we've just got a token of appreciation from the Mastercard Foundation Scholarship Program to say thank you for sharing all of your insights with us. Thanks. A round of applause, please.